So today I want to show you an interesting module from the Orange Line collection, Morpheus, right, that can generate sequences similarly to how the Turing machine works, but it can also store them and let you sequence between them and even let you morph between stable sequences and random sequences, so it really is lots of fun. Now let's start slowly and look at its Turing machine functionality first. I have it already running with a clock, and I have here a chain with kick all from Befako, right, going through some chorus, there is some modulation, wave shaping, some delay. So first of all, I will take the overall range here of Morpheus a bit down because I want to use it for pitch. Here with the scale, we can take the range down, so let's say about 2.8. Right, and now I will send this CV output already to a quantizer I have here mother also from Orange Line. Right, and already we get a random sequence of notes. Now, just like on the Turing machine, we can also lock the sequences, right? So it will loop if I take this all the way to the right. Right now we have a loop in this case of 16 steps, but we can change this. Let's go to, let's say, 7. Right, so now we have a looping sequence, and if the lock function is not all the way to the right, there will be some changes here and there. So if I take this to about, let's say, 75%, right, it will still stay somewhat repetitive, but there will be new notes coming every now and then. Right, so these random notes that are being or replacing the older notes, they are also affected by the scale and offset, right? So if I change the offset, for example, we can get a nice effect. Right? And this will happen just to the new notes. Again, we are 75% locked, so the older notes will not be affected by the scale and offset. Also the new random ones, only the new random ones. Right, something like this. Now we also have here the hold function that will freeze the loop and will not allow new random nodes to be generated. So if I lower, let's say, the lock to about 50%, so there is more chance for new random nodes to be generated. I can use, let's say, a divided clock to hold the sequence, right? I have here a clock divided by 16. So if I use this, right, so now with the divided clock, the sequence will always loop. And when the clock goes down, there is a 50% chance that new notes will be added to this sequence. I have here another sequence, right? In this case, it's a 5-step sequence that is already locked. Right, this is sequencing the twist VCO, going through a nice filter, and there is some modulation going on. Right, a 5-step looping sequence. Here we have also the random function that we can use to inject new random values even though the sequence is locked. So what I will do, I will use probability to make this happen. Here I have chances from count modular. Right, and I'm using the clock, so now chances will add probability to this clock that I can then use to add random notes here and there to this locked sequence. Right, so it will change the sequence every time the clock comes out of chances. This just needs a nice smooth bass. I have here the phrase sequencer sequencing the classic VCO with a filter, with a delay, and with a sub-oscillator with a sine VCO from Bog Audio. Oh yes. Now the real power of this module is the ability to store sequences and letting us switch between them. So if you ever use something like the Turing Machine and wish that you could record or store some of the sequences it generates, you can do this with this module. Here I have a sequence going, right? It will sequence the FM operator. It's just a random sequence on Morpheus, just like we've seen before. Right, by the way, it's a 5-step sequence, so if I lock it, right, we get a 5-step loop. Right, and let's say that I really like this sequence and I want to store it. I have here the memory section. For now it's on slot 1, so I can hit store and it will store this sequence to slot 1. Let's say that now I unlock it. Right, and again lock this, and I like again this sequence. And I would like to save this on another slot, so I will go to slot 2 and hit again store, and now it will store this on slot 2, and I can do this again for another one. Right, let's go maybe with the offset to 0, lock this, right, go to another slot, store this, right, and now I can switch between them, I can recall them, right, so if I want to go to slot 1, I hit recall. And I have the first sequence, or the second one, or the third. Right, and of course we can also sequence this externally as well. In the right-click menu there is a helpful option, load on memory CV change. This means that if you use external CV, all you need is to use the sequencer, for example, without triggers, without gates. It will just switch between the memory slots. So here I have the ADDR sequencer that I will use exactly for this. Right, this will switch between the saved sequences. It will be 1, 2, 1, 3. Right, so you can create longer sequences, you can create scenes, you can create all sorts of various variations with the sequences that you lock. Here I also have a bass, again kick-off from Befaco with some modulation, a chorus, distortion, a delay, all the good stuff. And I have here already a few sequences saved, and I'm using the steps module from Aleph Beats, right, to sequence between them. It will sound like this. interesting feature of this module is the ability to move between an incoming sequence and the random generated sequence, and actually even between sequences you stored in memory. So there are many ways of adding various amounts of variation and movement. Here I have a simple 8-step sequence on the sec3, right? This is sequencing, again, kick all with some delay. It will sound like this. I have Morpheus already running with the same clock I'm using for the sec3. Right, so now instead of using the sequence from the sec3, it will go first, if I zoom in a bit, it will go first to the external input on Morpheus, and then from Morpheus this will go back to the quantizer. Right, now we get a random sequence just like we've seen before. But here we have the source knob, so all the way right it will be the random sequence, all the way left we will use the source that in this case will be the external sequence. So if I just activate this, we get exactly the same sequence from the sec3. Right, but now again we have this source knob, so again all the way to the right we have the random generated sequence. All the way left, it's just a sec3. Right, but I can have this anywhere in between to have the steady or repetitive sequence and add some randomness to it. Right, so this now acts as a sort of a probability control between the external sequence and the randomly generated sequence. Right, now here is something, another thing interesting you can try. If I take this again all the way to the left, so again now we get just a sequence from the sec3, but I will use a different clock multiplication. Until now we used exactly the same clock that we used for the sec3, but now instead of it I'm going to use a clock multiplied by 8. Right, for the sec3 it was multiplied by 2, but now I'm going to use a multiplied by 8 clock. For now, again, with the source knob all the way to the left, we get the same result. But now, not only that it will add random notes in between, but we will also get random ratchets, because again, we are using a higher clock resolution. So have a listen to this. Right? The new notes or random notes that will be generated according to the multiplied by 8 clock. Right, also here by the way we can lock the sequence, so for example if I hold the sequence it will just repeat itself. Right, so also here you can get something a bit more repetitive. And as I mentioned before, we can also do this with stored sequences. Here I have a few sequences stored here on another Morpheus. The voice itself is again the twist VCO, in this case with the bandpass filter. Maybe, you know what, maybe I will solo this for a second. Right, so I have a few sequences stored. Right, and I'm switching between them with again the steps sequencer. And here, instead of using an external signal, I just have the external here set. You see source, it says memory. So all the way left, we will use the source from the memory, from what we stored. All the way right, again, we have a random sequence, but everywhere in between, we have probability to add randomness. Here I have a bass drone with a classic VCO, some interesting modulation, and a sub bass. And I have some glitchy hi-hats here with the Chronoblob 2 delay. Okay, now imagine all of this, but also polyphonic. Here I have it sequencing two FM operators as an FM voice, right? It's mostly random, but I'm also clocking here the hold function. It will sound like this. Right, and now all we have to do is choose how many channels of polyphony we want in the right-click menu. Channels, I will go with 3. So now we have 3 distinct sequences with 3 distinct voices. Right, this can sound quite nice. Also the various parameters are polyphonic, of course. Right, so here I have, let me solo this for a second, the dark energy. It's again being sequenced by Morpheus, in this case with 5 voices of polyphony. Right, so we get sorts of chords. But now each voice of these 5 voices can have different settings because also again the parameters are polyphonic. I have here 3 Polycon modules from Bog Audio. They will allow me to send offset to each of the channels polyphonically, so I can set the different parameters for each channel differently, right? I have one for length, one for lock, one for offset. In the right-click menu, you can change how many channels you want. So again, since I have on Morpheus 5 channels, I will have here also 5. And now, for example, if I take the length control all the way down and I connect the Polycon 8, right, I can set offset for each of the voices. So for example, voice 1 will have a certain amount of steps, voice 2 will have a different amount of steps, and so forth, and so on and so forth, right? The same with the lock. If I unlock this and I use another Polycon 8, I can have voice 1 almost always locked, voice 2 less, voice 3 will always be random, voice 4 will have something like this, and then voice 5. Right, and the same also with the offset, it's also polyphonic. Right, so I can use another Polycon 8, let's say voice 1 will be a bit down, voice 2 will go a bit up, 3 and 4 will stay the same, and 5 will go even higher, and this will happen. This will change just for the new random notes generated. Listen to this, this is so nice. Right, so again, also the parameters like the length, the lock, and the offset are also polyphonic. So if you are using polyphony, you can also have different settings for each of the voices. Again, this just needs a bass. I have here the bass module from Sively, extracting a bass voice from the polyphonic chords. The voice itself is the classic VCO, modern VCO, again a filter, again a delay, again a sub voice with a sine VCO from Bog Audio. Very nice. Right, so that's it. I hope you could see the potential of this lovely module and that you will go and explore it some more. Thank you so much for watching. Cheers!